Hello, everybody. My name is Connor. I'm actually kind of a regular at this point at Osrita. I've done three, or I've done two presentations before. This is actually my third presentation. Presentations I did before this one were the intro to organizations and the psychology of sales. And in a kind of nice way, they both tie into this presentation, which will be about lean, about the name of lean, the game of lean, the theory, and the hurdles that I experienced. Because I've worked as a marketing and sales manager for about 1.5 years, and yeah, basically something cool happened during the time, especially the first 6 months, that I'm going to tell you about in this presentation. Namely, while I was um, in the first 6 months of that of the management position, which was my first time ever that I had such responsibility, I tried to tweak the setup a little bit. I really love setups. That's kind of the thing that I'm most enthusiastic about. So what I tried to do was simply look at the way it was set up, everything that we had there in the department, and see if I had certain things that I could tweak. And the cool thing is that about 1 year after that, in one of my university courses, I got told about the idea of lean concept and the principles it has. And those principles kind of seem to completely overlap with all the things I've done. So I thought that was pretty cool. So I'm going to use that, my own personal invention of lean, so to call it, as a running example of the first 6 months that I was just working there, because that's the time it took to set it all up. And with that example, I'm going to tell you about the theory of lean. So yeah, I already told you what we're going to explain. So we're going to split it up in three different phases, kind of, which were the first 2 months, then the third and the fourth month, and then the fifth and the sixth. So first of all, month 1 and 2, basically you could call it the scare phase. This is not an actual accepted thing in lean, but it paints a good picture for what it all comes together. Because yeah, when you get into such a position, I think this experience is widely shared. It's very uncommon for somebody to actually have different experience than it. It's just completely scary, basically. There's very few things to hold on to, and everything is very different than the way you expected it. And this is actually something that's, yeah, I found pretty funny because it kind of ties in with something a professor of mine once said. I'll tell you a little bit about it later. But yeah, simply put, I won't go into too much detail. But for the first 1 and 2 months, I can remember telling a friend of mine I did not really know what my function was. I couldn't describe to anybody. Basically, I was there and I was just going from day to day. But every day there was something new that I didn't really expect it was part of the whole thing. And yeah, that's the first hurdle, you could say, because you can learn for a position. This doesn't only apply to management. You can learn for a position also much with trainings and with education, that kind of stuff, but it's always going to be different. And that's basically something. How do you get through the first phase, the scare phase? It's acceptance, basically. You got to basically just see that that's the way it's gonna be, because this is the thing that my professor told me when I was studying at the HBO. The thing is, every time you go to a company, especially if you go to the to the boss, the CEO of a company, and you tell him like this works for this and this company and da 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 da. He'll always, he said, this is guaranteed, and it was also completely my experience when I started talking with these people. They always say, no, but our company doesn't really work in the standard way. It's actually a very special way we do it. And every single company thinks about itself that way. And the funny thing is, it's actually true. Every company works completely different. And that's why you got to accept that everything that you're going to do, every position you're going to have, even if it's the same position in different companies, it's always going to be completely different. And that's kind of you could say, one of the base theories, one of the base principles of lean is that everything is always going to be different. Even lean even takes it further in the principle, saying that even the first year of a company and the second year and the fifth year and the 10th year and blah 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 is all going to be pretty incomparable. So yeah, basically it shows a little bit, I think, where the name of lean comes from, which is actually, it has to do with meat, with lean meat and fat meat, that you've probably heard about before. Basically, the reason it's called lean is because it's all about chopping off the fat. All those things that you have, all those things you usually have in your education about, okay, this is a method you can use and this is a protocol you can use. Lean is about chopping that off. All those things that aren't really, how do you say it, aren't the most fruitful, so that you only have the real lean meat without the fat left. And that lean meat is basically where the money's at, where the good things are at, the production and everything. So it's basically, in this case, you could say that the fatty part of the meat is all the yeah, like I was saying, all the all the noise of your company, all the things that you don't understand, all the confusion, the mist, and the real lean part. Then you might ask like, okay, well, what would it be? That is actually your skills basically in faring through that confusion and making sense of it. So lean first principle is basically not to learn very much about how can I really be very good at this specific situation that I have, but basically learn how can I be good with tackling new situations and try to learn that. And basically, it kind of says accept that the first 2 months are going to be pretty hard. At least it doesn't always have to be the first 2 months, but the first part, the scare phase, it's always going to be a lot of new inventions. Then at the third and the fourth month, when I was kind of, as I already told you, I didn't really know what I was doing well. Third and fourth months, I kind of got the hang of it. Got a bit acquainted with actually what the company was doing, what everything was about, and blah 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 blah. And yeah, one of those things was that I basically got a better overview of everything that was happening. As I already said, I love setups, so it was kind of more like seeing the big picture and how the whole setup worked of this company. Yeah, and one of the things I kind of found out from one thing, it wasn't really finding out, it's more like it became clear to me about the Pareto rule of 80 and 20, of how 20% of the things make 80% of the production, and also vice versa. You could really say that the 20% there is the lean meat and the 80% is the fatty meat, to give a good analogy of it. Yeah, basically, the 80%, what I would say of the production, was basically as a marketing and salesperson, I had a team behind me that was helping me, and what I saw was that basically all the things that we kind of planned beforehand with the whole team about how we would tackle certain problems, uh, yeah, it worked. It definitely worked. It wasn't anything unfruitful, but it took a lot of time. I think that was the 80% of time was preparing for when we knew that basically when we said like, okay, we need to think up something, we need to know, we need to think of things to increase sales and to increase brand value. That's marketing. And what we did was basically just sit around a lot and then eventually, yeah, we do it and it would work and everything. But what I saw was that basically like 80% of the real good stuff, like getting customers that we wouldn't get anyway, that were actually new, were new acquiry, that was all from basically the right timing, making sure that at a time when people were, for example, a little bit more scared, so they wanted something, a product that could reassure them, for example, that was really the right time, and that was really when we got the most out of it. So it was much more that it wasn't really much about how we did it. It was much more that we did it at the right time. So what I started to do, and this is more something for the implementation phase, but I started to basically just play with the idea, like how could we get more of this very fruitful part and less of the not so fruitful part. And during all of that, um, basically the hypothesis was all this time. Let me see, how can I phrase this better? This is like a very big part of the theory, is about how to use the scientific method in finding in making your findings. So basically, the, the the setup that we already had about let's just do it this way, let's just prepare a lot, let's get it very tight, and then basically execute it. Let's talk about it a whole lot. Was basically an assumption. It was the assumption that that would be the best way to do it, or at least the one that we chose. And lean is in that part very much based on what I already said, scientific theory, in that you never really go for assumptions. You should never really assume anything. You should make an hypothesis rather. All your assumptions, you could rephrase them to hypotheses. So for example, our assumption was, okay, the more time you put into it, the better. You could rephrase it to the hypothesis of how much how much extra value do we gain from every extra hour that we put into preparation? Or no, wait, an hypothesis could actually be, I'm sorry, that wasn't really phrased well. That was more of a scientific question. The hypothesis could then be how much extra. Oh no, not you shouldn't start with how much. Basically, just we get about 10% of extra output every extra hour that the entire group puts in. That would be a good hypothesis. And then you can test that. And basically, I started testing that and I found out that it really wasn't true. It was actually much less of much fewer output. And basically, everything that we did in the first kind of like 20 minutes, I would say, was already basically basically the whole thing about the output. We really didn't need that much preparation because it will always go different than everything we tightly prepared for. So yeah, to uh, to basically repeat it, the theory that's really central to this is that using the scientific method, you should always throw out every assumption that you have and just basically rephrase it as an hypothesis. And you shouldn't have to test it right away, but it really helps if you keep it in mind and keep looking out for it. Like, is it true? Is it, or even if it already was true in the past, is it still true right now? So after that, month 5 and 6, that's when the cool stuff happens, the implementation phase. Of course, I had these hypotheses, and I kind of knew that they weren't true. So what do you do when you have hypotheses that aren't true? You throw in new ones. So basically, what I did to test my new hypothesis that was about, it's more about the time when, is basically that I thought, okay, well, how do I make things more? How do I make sure that we can actually act more on those good times that don't really expect, but when you got a real good window for marketing? Basically, I thought, okay, we need a more flexible team. So my hypothesis was training people better will lead to more flexibility, and that will lead to better output, to better results. So yeah, what I basically did was I told the whole team like, okay, we're going to do lot fewer of these protocols because nobody really liked it that much to sit with each other and basically think of the ways to tightly go about marketing, and started training more like. So basically, just sit around and share things that worked in the past, share about things that you like, things that you might want to try out, and basically just it was a much more pleasant experience and also took a lot less time. But basically, just sit around and talk a lot like, okay, this works, this works, I think this works, I want to try out this, that kind of stuff. And what it did, it was basically put everybody in a much more active mindset. So that usually every time that there was a good window, I could just talk up any the entire group, and there would always be a couple of people who had time and could go straight ahead to it. And that was yeah, that worked very well. And actually, what we saw was that we took it's the time that we had to spend for it diminished with to like 10% of what we used to do. So that was really good because that was a lot more pleasant and a lot more chill for us. But also, what we saw was that the output first kind of stayed the same, and then it actually went up. It's hard to say if it would have gone up anyway, just because of the growth of and the more how do you say it, awareness of people about the company. Usually you see a slight growth just simply over time, but it was really cool that we could get those results with only 10% of the time we put it into it. And then yeah, I gotta say something about this. It didn't work right away. That's why I say month 5 and 6. It wasn't just like, okay, we're gonna do this, hey, problem solved. But what we saw was that the continuous renewal of it, and that's also a very, I could say, the last principle of lean is basically that everything that you've learned about lean, all those principles, you gotta say like, okay, well, yesterday isn't today. You gotta keep renewing it, keep getting it better. And because environments and things and whatever and companies and people are always changing, you gotta keep looking out. And that ties into the previous principle of the scientific method of the hypotheses. You gotta keep testing your hypotheses. It's never a fact. You gotta keep saying like, okay, it worked, it worked, it worked. Does it still work? And you gotta keep looking out for that. And in my personal opinion, that's a much nicer way of management where you don't have to basically be very close to everybody all the time and look at them and say very like monitor them strictly, like saying, okay, you need to do this, you need to do this. Oh, why haven't you put in so much time or effort today? Blah 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 blah. But basically, you're much more a person that keeps checking if things still work and if things still are applicable like they used to be. And basically, like that's maybe the very core of lean is to basically the fat you could see as the non-flexible part is to go for only the flexible part because it basically it motivates people more and it gives more output, takes less time to do. It's more reliable because what we've seen with the whole COVID crisis, things can change pretty rapidly when nobody even noticed it, when nobody would know it was going to happen. So yeah, the theory that you could say with this, the principle is that things are just forever in flux. It's an ongoing process, so continuous renewal isn't only nice, but it's actually the only way to keep existing over long times. So as a bottom line, to recap everything I just said, this whole salad of different information, eventually the things I learned, everything in hindsight, is that, as I already said, the principles, everything is always different. Every company is different, every year is different, every person is different. So don't don't force any protocols or any theories on anything, on any situation. You gotta just see it as your skills and your skill set, and you gotta find out a tailor-made solution for every single problem. The second one is, yeah, hypotheses over assumptions. As already said, the scientific methods should be central because it's the only way to know things as sure as we can. And then also that you should always strive for that continuous renewal because otherwise things are going to go south eventually. And actually, it's also a way to make sure that what you're doing is actually effective, which, as I already said, it's very good for motivation, not only for the people who support you, but also yourself. And then yeah, the best bottom line that you can actually give to, I'll make it in one sentence is notice the fat and chop off the fat. Okay, so that was my presentation, and thank you very much for listening.